London, 1857. The ballroom of Lord Huntington's grand estate shimmered with candlelight, casting golden hues across marble floors where the creme de la creme of London society twirled in practiced elegance. Ladies in silk gowns floated like exotic flowers among gentlemen in pristine evening wear, their collective worth in jewels alone enough to feed half of London's poor for a decade. Among them stood Miss Winifred Whitmore, 22 years old and decidedly out of place. Her gown, though beautifully made, lacked the excessive embellishments that adorned those of her peers. The pale blue silk had been refashioned from one of her late mother's dresses, the beadwork painstakingly applied by her own hands. It was a masterful alteration, but to the discerning eyes of society matrons, the evidence of economy was unmistakable. "Remember, Winifred," her Aunt Agatha whispered severely, "this may be your final opportunity to secure a suitable match. Your father's debts won't disappear with wishful thinking." Winifred nodded dutifully, though inside her stomach clenched. 3 seasons had passed since her debut, and the whispers had grown increasingly merciless. "Lovely girl, such a pity about her circumstances," they would say, barely bothering to lower their voices as she passed. Her family's gradual decline had accelerated dramatically with her father's death last winter, leaving a mountain of gambling debts that threatened to consume what little remained of the Whitmore estate. "Lady Huntington has been most generous with her invitation," Aunt Agatha continued. "Do try to appear grateful and, for heaven's sake, smile." Winifred managed a wan smile, her eyes drifting toward the terrace doors. Beyond the crowded ballroom lay the famous Huntington Gardens, rumored to be the most spectacular in England. Perhaps she could slip away, just for a moment. "Miss Whitmore," came a voice, interrupting her thoughts. Lord Peverley, a man approaching 60 with a considerable fortune and 3 previous wives in the ground, stood before her with an expectant smile. "Might I have the pleasure of this dance?" For the next hour, Winifred was passed between aging widowers and fortune-seeking second sons, each weighing her diminishing prospects against her still respectable family name and pleasing appearance. By the time she had been returned to her aunt's side after a particularly tedious country dance, her cheeks ached from forced smiles and her feet throbbed within her satin slippers. "I need a moment of air," she whispered to Aunt Agatha, who frowned but nodded reluctantly. 10 minutes, no more," her aunt cautioned. "Lord Peverley has been most attentive. It would be unwise to discourage him." Winifred slipped through the terrace doors and into the blessed coolness of the evening. The garden spread before her, a wonderland of geometric hedges and marble fountains illuminated by strategically placed lanterns. She wandered deeper, following a gravel path that wound between roses whose perfume hung heavy in the night air. "You shouldn't venture so far alone, miss." The voice startled her. Turning, she found herself facing a tall man in simple clothes, clearly one of the gardeners working late to ensure the grounds remained immaculate for the ball. He stood with pruning shears in hand, silhouetted against the lights of the manor house. "Forgive me," Winifred said, embarrassed to be caught wandering. "I needed respite from the heat of the ballroom." The man stepped forward, and in the lantern light, she could better see his features. He was younger than she had initially thought, perhaps 30, with a strong jaw and dark hair that curled slightly where it fell across his forehead. His clothes, though plain, were well fitted, and there was something in his bearing that spoke of confidence rather than servility. "No forgiveness necessary," he replied, his voice refined despite his apparent station. "These gardens were designed to be admired. I'm merely suggesting that society might not look kindly upon a young lady exploring them alone after dark." "Society rarely looks kindly upon me regardless," Winifred found herself saying, then flashed at her own candor. The man's mouth curved into a smile. "Then society is short-sighted indeed." There was something disarming about his directness, about the way his eyes, a deep blue barely discernible in the dim light, seemed to see beyond her carefully maintained facade. "Do you work in these gardens often?" she asked, curious despite herself. "I have a particular interest in them," he answered enigmatically. From the house came the strains of a waltz, drifting through the night air. The gardener tilted his head, listening. "You're missing the dancing." "I've had quite enough dancing for one evening," Winifred admitted. "Not enjoying your partners?" There was a hint of amusement in his tone. "They're perfectly adequate, gentlemen," she replied diplomatically. "Adequate?" He chuckled. Such damning praise. The music swelled, and on impulse, he set down his shears, stepped forward, and extended his hand. "Perhaps I might offer an alternative." Winifred knew she should refuse. Dancing with a gardener in the shadows of Lord Huntington's estate was precisely the sort of behavior that could destroy what remained of her reputation. Yet something in his confident gaze challenged her, and the night air seemed to have imbued her with a recklessness foreign to her normally prudent nature. She placed her gloved hand in his. His hand settled at her waist with surprising assurance as he guided her into the steps of a waltz. For a gardener, he danced remarkably well, leading her with the practiced ease of someone who had attended countless balls. They moved together across a small clearing bordered by roses, the gravel crunching softly beneath their feet. "You dance beautifully for a gardener," she observed, curiosity getting the better of her. "And you dance beautifully for a woman who claims to have had enough dancing," he countered smoothly. "Perhaps it's the company rather than the activity that makes the difference." His eye sparked with interest. "Miss Whitmore," she supplied. "Winifred Whitmore." A flash of recognition crossed his face, there and gone so quickly she almost missed it. "Miss Whitmore. A pleasure." "And you are?" "James," he replied simply. "Just James tonight." There was something oddly familiar about him, though Winifred was certain they had never met. Perhaps she had seen him working on the grounds during previous visits to Huntington House. "Well, just James," she said, finding herself uncharacteristically playful. "I suspect you have not always been a gardener." "What makes you say that?" "Your hands," she noted. "Despite your tools, they lack the calluses one would expect from years of manual labor." He laughed then, a rich sound that sent an unexpected warmth through her. "Observant, aren't you?" "Let's just say I'm something of an enthusiast rather than a professional." "An amateur gardener working at Lord Huntington's ball? How intriguing." "I find it sometimes necessary to step outside one's usual role to gain a different perspective," he said cryptically. They continued to waltz, conversation flowing with surprising ease. James spoke of plants and architecture with the knowledge of an educated man, asking her thoughtful questions about her own interests in literature and art. Winifred found herself laughing genuinely for the first time in months, forgetting momentarily the precarious state of her family's finances and her aunt's matrimonial ambitions for her. Winifred Whitmore." Her aunt's voice, sharp with alarm, cut through their conversation. The music from the house had stopped, and Winifred realized with horror that far more than 10 minutes had passed. "I must go," she said hurriedly, stepping back from her unusual partner. "Must you?" There was genuine regret in his eyes. "Yes, she hesitated, then impulsively removed the small sprig of forget-me-nots that had adorned her hair. "Here. A token of thanks for the most enjoyable dance of my evening." He accepted the flowers with a formal bow that seemed strangely natural coming from him. "Until we meet again, Miss Whitmore." "Do you think we shall?" His smile was enigmatic. "I'm counting on it." She hurried back toward the house, reaching her aunt just as the older woman was about to venture into the gardens herself. "Where have you been?" Aunt Agatha demanded. "Lord Peverley has been asking for you, and I've been made to look a fool, unable to locate my own niece." "I'm sorry, Aunt. I lost track of time admiring the gardens." "Gardens? As if flowers will pay your father's creditors." Her aunt seized her arm, pulling her back toward the ballroom. "Come, we must make amends for your absence." The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of forced conversation and careful avoidance of Lord Peverley's increasingly possessive attentions. Yet Winifred found her thoughts repeatedly straying to the garden and the peculiar man she had met there. There had been something in his manner, in the quiet confidence with which he had held himself, that had affected her more deeply than she cared to admit. It was nearly dawn by the time they returned to their modest townhouse in a less fashionable corner of Mayfair. As her lady's maid helped her undress, Winifred's mind kept returning to the gardener called James, to the surprising grace with which he had led her in the waltz, and to the educated manner of his speech. "Miss," her maid prompted, holding out her nightgown. "Forgive me, Alice. My thoughts were wandering." "The ball was satisfactory, then?" Winifred smiled faintly. "It was unexpected." She slept fitfully, dreaming of gardens and waltzes and a pair of blue eyes that seemed to see straight through her carefully maintained facade. Morning brought a return to harsh reality. Over a sparse breakfast, Aunt Agatha outlined in excruciating detail the financial calamity that awaited them if Winifred did not secure an advantageous match before the season's end. "Lord Peverley has expressed interest," her aunt reminded her. "He may not be young, but his fortune is considerable." "He has buried 3 wives already, Aunt," Winifred pointed out quietly. "I have no wish to become the 4th. Beggars cannot be choosers, child. Your father saw to that when he gambled away your dowry and mortgaged the family estate to its hilt." The arrival of the Morning Post temporarily halted this familiar and painful conversation. Aunt Agatha sorted through the letters, her expression growing increasingly grave until she reached the final envelope. Her eyebrows shot up in astonishment. "What is it?" Winifred asked. "An invitation," her aunt replied, bewilderment evident in her tone. "From the Duke of Harrington." Winifred frowned. "The Duke of Harrington? But why would he invite us? I don't believe we've ever been formally introduced." The Duke of Harrington was something of a London enigma. Though his title was among the oldest and most respected in England, and his fortune reportedly vast, he had spent much of the past decade abroad. His return to London society some months ago had caused quite a stir, particularly among marriage-minded mammas with eligible daughters. Yet he had proven elusive, attending few social functions and revealing little about his time away. "It's an invitation to a garden party at Harrington House," Aunt Agatha continued, scanning the elegant script. "For tomorrow afternoon." She looked up, eyes narrowing with sudden calculation. "This could be a most fortunate development." "How so?" "The Duke is unmarried, child. Exceedingly wealthy and, by all accounts, still under 40. If he has noticed you—" "But he hasn't noticed me," Winifred protested. "We've never met." "Evidently, you've made an impression without realizing it," her aunt replied tartly. "This invitation is specifically addressed to both of us. We shall certainly attend." Winifred sighed, knowing further argument would be futile. Another afternoon of being paraded before a prospective husband, albeit one of considerably higher rank than her usual suitors. Still, there was something odd about the timing, coming so soon after the Huntington ball. The thought of the ball brought back memories of her garden encounter, and she found herself wondering what James the gardener might be doing today. It was a foolish thought, one she quickly dismissed. Whatever fleeting connection they had shared was nothing more than a momentary diversion, a brief escape from the suffocating reality of her circumstances. Harrington House stood on an expansive plot in the most exclusive area of London, its classical facade a testament to Georgian architectural elegance. As their modest carriage joined the procession of more luxurious conveyances approaching the estate the following afternoon, Winifred felt her anxiety mounting. "Remember to smile," Aunt Agatha instructed, adjusting her niece's bonnet with critical fingers. "And for heaven's sake, mention your accomplishments if the opportunity arises. Your watercolors are quite adequate, and your pianoforte skills passable." "Such glowing praise, Aunt," Winifred murmured, earning herself a sharp look. "This is no time for impertinence. The Duke of Harrington could solve all our problems with a single proposal." They were announced at the entrance to the gardens, where a liveried footman directed them toward the gathering of guests on the expansive lawn. Winifred couldn't help but admire the grounds as they walked. Unlike the formal, geometric precision of Lord Huntington's gardens, these seemed designed to enhance rather than constrain nature's beauty. Flowering trees created dappled shade over winding paths, and artfully placed benches invited contemplation of particularly stunning vistas. "The Duke is reputed to have unusual tastes in landscape design," Aunt Agatha commented, following Winifred's gaze. "Apparently, he brought back foreign notions from his travels." The guests were an impressive assembly of London's elite, with several faces Winifred recognized from the Huntington ball. Lady Peverley cast her a calculating look before deliberately turning away, undoubtedly displeased by her son's interest in a family of such diminished circumstances. They had been there perhaps 20 minutes, making careful small talk with various acquaintances, when a murmur ran through the gathering. Heads turned toward the house, and conversations faltered. "The Duke," someone whispered. "He's finally making an appearance." Winifred turned with the others, curious to see the elusive aristocrat who had summoned them to his home. A tall figure in impeccably tailored clothes emerged from the house, pausing at the top of the garden steps to survey his guests. Her heart stopped. Though now attired in the finest clothes money could buy rather than a gardener's simple attire, there was no mistaking those features, that bearing, those eyes, now clearly visible in daylight as the deep blue she had glimpsed in the lantern light. James! The gardener from Lord Huntington's ball. Except he wasn't a gardener at all. He was James Harrington, the Duke of Harrington, one of the wealthiest and most eligible men in England. And he was looking directly at her, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "My dear guests," he addressed the gathering, his voice carrying easily across the lawn. "Thank you for joining me today. Please, enjoy the gardens and refreshments. I shall endeavor to speak with each of you before the afternoon concludes." He began to move among his guests, accepting their greetings with gracious nods, but Winifred noticed his path was deliberately angling toward where she stood frozen beside her aunt. "Smile," Aunt Agatha hissed, having noticed nothing amiss. "The Duke is approaching. This is most promising." Winifred could not have smiled if her life depended on it. Her mind raced, piecing together the implications of what had happened at the Huntington ball. He had known who she was when she introduced herself, that flash of recognition had been real. Yet he had concealed his own identity, allowing her to believe him a simple gardener. But why? "Miss Whitmore," he greeted her, stopping before them and bowing formally. "Mrs. Whitmore. I'm delighted you could attend." "Your Grace," Aunt Agatha simpered, executing an elaborate curtsy. "We are honored by your invitation." His eyes, however, remained fixed on Winifred, who had yet to speak or properly acknowledge him. There was a question in his gaze, a hint of uncertainty beneath his ducal composure. "If you'll excuse us, Mrs. Whitmore," he said smoothly, "I believe your niece promised to give me her opinion on a particular variety of rose I've recently cultivated." Before Aunt Agatha could respond, though her expression of stunned delight spoke volumes, he had offered Winifred his arm and was leading her away from the main gathering toward a secluded section of the garden. "You're angry," he observed once they were beyond earshot of the other guests. "I'm confused," she replied carefully. "Why the deception, Your Grace?" "James, please. At least when we're not in company." "Very well, James. Why pretend to be a gardener? Was it amusing to toy with the naive daughter of a ruined family?" He winced. "That was never my intention. Quite the opposite, in fact." They had reached a small gazebo nestled among blooming clematis vines, hidden from the main lawn by a strategic arrangement of trees. He gestured for her to enter, and after a moment's hesitation, she did. "I often work in my gardens in the evening," he explained, remaining standing as she took a seat on the wooden bench. "It clears my mind. When Lord Huntington mentioned he was hosting a ball, I saw an opportunity." "An opportunity for what?" "To observe society without the weight of my title preceding me." His expression grew serious. "Since returning to London, I found myself the object of relentless pursuit by matchmaking mothers and their daughters. Every conversation, every dance, every interaction is colored by my wealth and position." "Poor Duke," Winifred said, unable to keep the edge from her voice. "How terrible to be pursued for your fortune when others are ruined by the lack of one." Rather than taking offense, he smiled. "Precisely. You see it clearly. That night in Huntington's garden, when you didn't know who I was, you spoke to me as a person, not a title. You were genuine. Do you know how rare that is in our circles?" She softened slightly. "I suppose I can understand the appeal of anonymity. When you told me your name, I recognized it immediately. The Whitmore family's circumstances are well known, I'm afraid. Our shame is indeed public knowledge, she acknowledged bitterly. Not shame, he corrected. Misfortune. There's a difference. But I realized that if I revealed myself, you would inevitably change, become guarded, careful, perhaps even begin calculating like all the rest. I selfishly wanted a few more minutes of honest conversation. Winifred studied him, trying to reconcile the gardener she had danced with and the Duke who stood before her. And now? Why invite me here today? Because I haven't been able to stop thinking about you. The directness of his answer caught her off guard. About your laugh, your observations, the way you didn't hesitate to dance with a man you believed to be a gardener. I shouldn't have done that, she admitted. It was reckless. It was refreshing. He took a seat beside her, careful to maintain a proper distance. Miss Whitmore, Winifred, I've spent the past decade traveling the world, seeing wonders and meeting people from all walks of life. It changed me. I no longer fit comfortably within the rigid structures of our society. Yet you've returned to claim your place within it. With responsibilities, yes. But I had hoped to find someone who might share my somewhat unconventional perspectives. He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew something that made her breath catch, the small sprig of forget-me-not she had given him, now pressed and preserved. Someone who might see the man beyond the title. You can't possibly know if I'm that person based on one conversation and a dance, she protested, though her heart had begun to beat faster. No, he agreed. Which is why I've invited you here today. To begin to find out, properly this time. No deceptions, no pretense. My circumstances haven't changed, she reminded him. My family's financial situation is dire. Any association with me would be considered imprudent for someone in your position. He laughed. I've lived among Bedouin tribes in the desert and studied with Buddhist monks in the mountains of Japan. Society already considers me eccentric at best. I assure you, my concern for their opinion of my choice of companion is minimal. The mention of companion sent a flutter through her chest that she tried desperately to suppress. What exactly are you proposing, Your Grace? James, he corrected again, then smiled. For now, simply a walk through the gardens. Conversation. The chance to know each other as we truly are. Beyond that. He hesitated. I would not presume to predict the future, but I find myself uncharacteristically hopeful about its possibilities. Winifred knew she should be cautious. The Duke's interest, however genuine it might seem, could fade as quickly as it had appeared. And yet, there had been a connection between them that night in the garden, a natural ease that had nothing to do with his concealed identity. A walk through the garden sounds lovely, she finally said. Though my aunt will no doubt be wondering where I've disappeared to. I've taken the liberty of having my housekeeper engage Mrs. Whitmore in conversation about the refreshments. She's quite thoroughly distracted for the moment. Winifred couldn't help but laugh. You seem to have thought of everything. Not everything, he admitted, offering his hand to help her rise. For instance, I have no idea if you'll still find me as agreeable now that you know I'm a duke rather than a gardener. She accepted his hand, feeling the same spark of connection she had felt that night at the ball. I suppose we shall have to discover that together. They emerged from the gazebo and began to walk along a winding path lined with summer blooms. From the main lawn came the sounds of the gathering, light laughter, the clink of glasses, string instruments playing gentle melodies, but here in this secluded section of the garden, it felt as though they occupied a world of their own. These gardens, Winifred observed, they're quite different from Lord Huntington's. His are designed to demonstrate man's mastery over nature, James replied. I prefer to work with nature rather than against it. To enhance what's already there rather than forcing it into unnatural shapes. A philosophical difference reflected in landscape design. Precisely. He looked pleased by her understanding. During my travels, I came to appreciate beauty in its more natural forms. The Japanese, in particular, have elevated garden design to an art form that honors the inherent character of the landscape. As they walked, he pointed out various plants and features, speaking with genuine enthusiasm about their origins and significance. Winifred found herself drawn into his passion, asking questions and offering observations that he received with evident pleasure. "You have an eye for detail," he noted after she had commented on a particularly effective arrangement of contrasting foliage. "My father always said I noticed too much," she admitted. He found it tiresome. "I find it admirable." He paused at a stone bench overlooking a small pond where water lilies floated like jewels on the surface. "May I ask about your father? I've heard rumors, of course, but I'd prefer to know the truth from you." Winifred hesitated, then sat on the bench, gathering her thoughts. "He was a good man in many ways," she began. "Kind, generous, full of grand ideas. But he had a weakness for games of chance and an unshakable belief that the next wager would reverse his fortunes." "It rarely does," James observed quietly, taking a seat beside her. "Never, in his case." She looked out over the pond, finding it easier to speak without meeting his gaze. "My mother's death when I was 15 seemed to accelerate his decline. By the time he passed last winter, he had mortgaged everything of value and borrowed against what little remained. The creditors were circling before his body was cold. And so the responsibility fell to you. To me, and to Aunt Agatha, who has made it her mission to see me advantageously married before we lose what remains of our home and possessions. Hence Lord Peverley's attentions." She glanced at him in surprise. "You noticed? I make it my business to be observant, too." His expression darkened slightly. "He's not a man of good character, despite his wealth. Few men of good character are interested in a penniless young woman with a tarnished family name," she pointed out pragmatically. "Perhaps you underestimate your worth beyond the financial." There was a warmth in his voice that made her cheeks flush. "And perhaps you've spent too long away from London society," she countered. "Value here is measured in pound sterling and ancestral connections, not personal qualities. Then society is poorer for it." He picked up a small stone and skimmed it across the pond's surface. "During my travels, I met people who owned nothing beyond what they could carry, yet possessed a richness of spirit that many in our so-called civilized circles would envy. It sounds as though you preferred their company to ours." "In many ways, yes." He turned to face her directly. "But I've discovered that authenticity can be found in unexpected places, even in London drawing rooms." The intensity of his gaze made her heart beat faster. "You speak as though you've found something rare." "Perhaps I have." He smiled then, the same unguarded smile she had first seen in Huntington's garden. "Tell me, Miss Whitmore, if circumstances were different, if you were not pressured by financial concerns, what would you choose for yourself?" It was a question no one had asked her before, and she found herself momentarily at a loss for words. I'm not entirely sure," she admitted finally. "I've spent so long thinking about what I must do that I've scarcely considered what I might want. If you could do anything, go anywhere, what would it be?" She closed her eyes briefly, allowing herself to imagine such freedom. "I'd travel," she said softly. Not as a tourist seeing only the grand sights and staying in fine hotels, but as a true explorer. "I'd sketch the buildings and gardens of Italy, walk the highlands of Scotland, perhaps even venture to the ancient cities of the East that I've only read about in books." When she opened her eyes, she found him watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. "What?" "You're remarkable," he said simply. "Most young ladies in your position would speak of securing a comfortable home or fashionable clothes. I've never been particularly fashionable," she admitted with a small laugh. Much to my aunt's dismay. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the distant sounds of the party and the occasional splash of a fish breaking the pond's surface. Winifred was acutely aware of his proximity, of the strange sense of connection that had only grown stronger despite the revelation of his true identity. "We should return to the others," she said eventually, though reluctantly. "My aunt will be beside herself by now." "Yes, I suppose we must." He stood and offered his hand. "But before we do, I have a proposition for you." "A proposition?" Her tone was wary. Nothing improper, he assured her quickly. I'm hosting a smaller gathering here next week, a dinner followed by musical entertainment. I'd be honored if you and your aunt would attend. Relief and pleasure mingled in her response. We would be delighted. Excellent. He hesitated, then added, perhaps you might arrive an hour earlier than the other guests. I have some rare botanical specimens in the conservatory that I believe would interest you. She recognized the invitation for what it was, an opportunity to spend more time together away from the watchful eyes of society. It was forward, perhaps even slightly scandalous, but she found herself nodding without hesitation. I'll look forward to it. As they walked back toward the main gathering, James offered her his arm. She took it, aware of the significance of being seen in such a familiar pose with the Duke of Harrington. The moment they emerged onto the main lawn, she felt the weight of curious stares and whispered comments. People are watching, she murmured. Let them, he replied with calm assurance. London thrives on gossip. We might as well give them something worth discussing. Aunt Agatha's expression upon seeing them approach arm in arm was a study in astonished delight. She hurried toward them, practically quivering with excitement. Your Grace, she gushed, what a magnificent estate you have. The gardens are beyond compare. Thank you, Mrs. Whitmore. Your niece has been kind enough to offer her impressions as well. She has quite an eye for landscape design. Does she indeed? Aunt Agatha threw Winifred a look that clearly communicated her amazement at this unexpected development. How fortunate that her modest talents have been recognized by someone of such discerning taste. James smiled diplomatically. I've just invited Miss Whitmore and yourself to a small gathering here next week. I do hope you'll be able to attend. We would be delighted, Your Grace. Absolutely delighted. The remainder of the afternoon passed in a blur for Winifred. Though James was required to attend to his other guests, she frequently caught him watching her from across the lawn, his gaze finding hers with a warmth that sent color to her cheeks. By the time they departed, whispers were circulating freely among the guests, speculation mounting about the Duke's apparent interest in the Whitmore girl. In the carriage on the way home, Aunt Agatha could barely contain herself. The Duke of Harrington, she exclaimed for perhaps the 20th time. Do you realize what this could mean, Winifred? His fortune is said to be among the largest in England. And to think he singled you out from all the eligible young ladies present. We merely walked in the garden and discussed plants, Aunt, Winifred demurred, though her heart beat faster at the memory. Nonsense. I saw how he looked at you. And an invitation to another gathering so soon. It's most promising. Her aunt's face grew serious. You must not squander this opportunity, child. The Duke could be the answer to all our prayers. Winifred turned to look out the carriage window, her thoughts in turmoil. She couldn't deny her growing attraction to James Harrington, to his intelligence, his unconventional perspectives, the ease she felt in his company. Yet she was painfully aware of how their circumstances differed. He might find her refreshingly genuine now, but would that novelty soon wear thin? And even if his interest was sincere, could she bear the scrutiny and likely disapproval that would come with being courted by a duke? The days leading up to the dinner at Harrington House passed with excruciating slowness. Aunt Agatha, determined to present her niece in the most favorable light possible, spent nearly their last funds on having Winifred's best evening gown altered to reflect the latest fashion. Rumors of the Duke's interest had already spread throughout London society, bringing a flurry of previously withheld invitations and sudden renewals of lapsed acquaintances. It's remarkable how our social standing improves with the mere suggestion of ducal attention, Winifred observed dryly as yet another calling card arrived from a family that had pointedly ignored them for months. Such is the way of the world, my dear, Aunt Agatha replied pragmatically. One must use whatever advantages present themselves. The evening of the dinner arrived at last. As arranged, they reached Harrington House an hour before the other guests were expected. A footman escorted them not to the formal drawing room but to a magnificent glass-domed conservatory attached to the east wing of the mansion. James was waiting for them, dressed impeccably but without ostentation. His face brightened visibly when he saw Winifred, and he came forward to greet them with genuine warmth. Mrs. Whitmore, Miss Whitmore, thank you for indulging my request to arrive early. I thought you might enjoy seeing the conservatory before it becomes crowded with other guests." "How thoughtful, Your Grace," Aunt Agatha simpered. "Winifred has always had an interest in exotic plants, haven't you, dear?" Winifred murmured agreement, though her attention was caught by the extraordinary space around them. Soaring glass walls and ceiling created a cathedral-like atmosphere filled with greenery. Plants she had never seen before grew in artful arrangements, creating the impression of a tropical forest rather than a carefully curated collection. "This is magnificent," she breathed, forgetting propriety in her wonder. James smiled, clearly pleased by her reaction. "I've tried to recreate some of the natural environments I encountered during my travels. This section," he indicated an area of dense foliage punctuated by brilliantly colored flowers, "represents the rainforests of Brazil." For the next half hour, he guided them through the conservatory, pointing out rare specimens and sharing stories of how he had acquired them. Though Aunt Agatha made a show of interest, it soon became apparent that her enthusiasm for botany was limited. "I wonder, Your Grace," she said during a pause in his explanations, "might I trouble you for a glass of water? The warmth in here is quite affecting." "Of course." James signaled to a hovering servant. "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable in the drawing room while you wait for the other guests. Roberts can show you the way and ensure you have whatever refreshments you require." Aunt Agatha hesitated, clearly torn between propriety and opportunity. "I couldn't possibly leave my niece unchaperoned. I assure you, Mrs. Whitmore, the doors to the conservatory remain open to the house, and servants pass through regularly. Miss Whitmore's reputation is quite safe in my home." After a moment's further deliberation, during which she cast a meaningful glance at her niece, Aunt Agatha allowed herself to be escorted away. As soon as she was out of earshot, Winifred turned to James with raised eyebrows. "That was rather neatly done." He laughed. "I confess to having planned it. Your aunt strikes me as someone who appreciates comfort over botany. You've assessed her character accurately." Winifred ran her fingertips lightly over the glossy leaf of a nearby plant. "Though I'm not entirely sure she should have left us alone." "Because you don't trust me?" he asked, watching her closely. "Because I'm not entirely sure I trust myself," she admitted, then flushed at her own candor. His expression softened. "Winifred," he began, then paused, seemingly gathering his thoughts. "These past days since the garden party, I've found myself thinking of little else but you. Your intelligence, your resilience, the way you see the world." He took a step closer. "I know we've known each other only briefly, and under unusual circumstances, but I feel a connection with you that I've never experienced before." Her heart was racing now, her breath shallow. "James, please, let me finish." He took her hand gently. "I understand your situation. I know the pressures you face, the expectations society places on you. And I recognize that my position complicates matters further." His thumb traced small circles on her palm, sending shivers up her arm. "But I want you to know that my interest in you has nothing to do with pity or novelty or any of the other concerns you might reasonably harbor." "Then what does it have to do with?" she asked softly. "With the simple fact that in you, I believe I've found someone who sees me, truly sees me as I am. Not as a title or a fortune, but as a man with ideas and passions and flaws." He smiled ruefully. "Even when you thought I was merely a gardener, you treated me with respect and genuine interest. Do you know how rare that is?" Winifred felt herself balanced on the edge of something momentous, something that both thrilled and terrified her. "Society would say we barely know each other," she pointed out, trying to maintain some semblance of rationality despite the warmth of his hand around hers. "Society measures acquaintance by the number of formal calls and dinner parties shared," he countered. "I measure it by the depth of understanding reached. By that standard, I feel I know you better after our few conversations than I know many I've met 100 times in drawing rooms." "And what is it you think you understand about me?" she challenged gently. "I understand that beneath your practical exterior beats a heart that longs for adventure and beauty. I understand that you carry the weight of your family's expectations with grace but not without cost. I understand that you value authenticity over pretense, substance over appearance. His gaze held hers steadily. Have I misunderstood? She shook her head slowly. No, she whispered. You see me rather too clearly for comfort. As you see me. He released her hand reluctantly as the sound of arriving carriages filtered through from outside. Our other guests are arriving. We should join your aunt. The evening that followed was both wonderful and torturous for Winifred. Wonderful because James, while performing his duties as host impeccably, found countless small ways to single her out for attention, seeking her opinion on the music, ensuring her wine glass was never empty, placing her beside him at dinner. Torturous because every such gesture was noted by the assembled company, their curious glances and whispered comments a constant reminder of the scrutiny under which any relationship between them would exist. Lord Peverley was among the guests, his displeasure at the Duke's obvious attentions to Winifred evident in his pinched expression and clipped responses. By the time the evening concluded, the speculation among the other guests had reached fever pitch, and Aunt Agatha was practically vibrating with suppressed excitement. As they prepared to depart, James took Winifred's hand and bowed over it formally. Miss Whitmore, might I call on you tomorrow? There is a matter I wish to discuss with you. Of course, Your Grace, she replied, aware of the listening ears around them. We would be honored to receive you. His eyes held hers a moment longer than strictly proper, communicating something that sent warmth spreading through her chest. Until tomorrow, then. The carriage ride home was filled with Aunt Agatha's excited speculations and plans. A duke, she kept saying. To think that all our troubles might be solved so wonderfully. Winifred barely heard her. Her mind was too full of James, of his words in the conservatory, of the way he had looked at her throughout the evening, of the promise of tomorrow's visit. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to hope for a future shaped by something other than financial necessity. Morning brought an unexpected visitor to their modest townhouse. Winifred was still at her dressing table when the maid announced that Lady Peverley requested an urgent interview. Lady Peverley. Winifred frowned, unable to imagine what might bring the austere matron to their door. Please show her to the drawing-room. I'll be down directly. She found both Lady Peverley and Aunt Agatha waiting for her, the former rigid with barely contained indignation, the latter pale and distressed. Ah, Miss Whitmore, Lady Peverley said coldly as Winifred entered. How fortunate that you are at home. I was just explaining to your aunt the delicate matter that brings me here. I'm afraid I don't understand, Winifred replied, taking a seat across from their unwelcome visitor. It has come to my attention that you have been encouraging the attentions of the Duke of Harrington. Lady Peverley's tone suggested she was discussing something distasteful. While I understand the desperation of your circumstances might lead to certain ambitions, I feel it my duty to inform you that you are placing yourself in an untenable position. I beg your pardon. Winifred felt a chill run down her spine. The Duke's interest in you, however flattering it might seem, can only lead to one of two outcomes, neither of which would be to your benefit. Lady Peverley adjusted her gloves primly. Either he is amusing himself at your expense, in which case your reputation will be irreparably damaged when he inevitably moves on, or, and this is equally concerning, his interest is genuine but naive. I fail to see how the Duke's genuine interest could be considered concerning, Aunt Agatha interjected, finding her voice at last. Lady Peverley's smile was thin and cold. Because, Mrs. Whitmore, society would never accept such a misalliance. The Duke of Harrington is one of the oldest and most respected titles in England. His family has been aligned with royalty for generations. Do you truly believe that a young woman from a family tainted by gambling debts and financial ruin could ever be accepted as his duchess? Winifred felt as though the air had been knocked from her lungs. The practical part of her mind acknowledged the brutal truth in Lady Peverley's words, even as her heart rebelled against them. Your concern is touching, Lady Peverley, she managed to say with forced calm, but I believe the Duke is capable of making his own decisions regarding his associations. Of course he is, my dear. But are you prepared for the consequences? The whispers? The closed doors? The subtle and not so subtle reminders that you do not belong in his world. Lady Peverley leaned forward slightly. And then there is the matter of my son. Lord Peverley has shown me great kindness, Winifred acknowledged cautiously, but I have made him no promises. Perhaps not explicitly, Lady Peverley conceded, but by accepting his attentions over many months, you have created certain expectations. Expectations that could provide a respectable solution to your family's difficulties. The implied offer hung in the air between them, Lord Peverley's hand in marriage in exchange for financial security. It was, Winifred realized, exactly the kind of arrangement she had been prepared to accept before James entered her life. I appreciate your candor, Lady Peverley, she said carefully, and your son's interest. But I cannot commit to any understanding at present. I see. Lady Peverley rose, radiating disapproval. Then I have said what I came to say. I only hope you will consider the realities of your position before embarking on a course that can only end in disappointment and further disgrace for your family name. After she had departed, Aunt Agatha turned to Winifred with worried eyes. Could she be right? Would society truly never accept you as the Duchess of Harrington? Winifred moved to the window, watching Lady Peverley's carriage pull away. I don't know, she admitted. But I suspect there is truth in what she says. But the Duke seemed so attentive, so genuinely interested. Yes. Winifred pressed her fingertips against the cool glass. But interest is not the same as intention, and even the strongest intention might falter under sufficient opposition. The arrival of another carriage interrupted their conversation. Winifred's heart leapt when she recognized the Harrington crest on its door. James had come, as promised. I need to speak with him alone, she told her aunt. Please. After a moment's hesitation, Aunt Agatha nodded. Very well. But remember what's at stake, child. James entered the drawing room with a smile that faded quickly when he saw Winifred's troubled expression. What's happened? He asked without preamble. Lady Peverley paid us a visit this morning, she replied, gesturing for him to sit. She was most concerned about the attention you've been showing me. His jaw tightened. I see. And what exactly did Lady Peverley have to say? Winifred related the conversation as accurately as she could, watching his expression darken with each word. When she finished, he stood and paced to the window, his back to her. She's wrong, he said finally, turning to face her again. About me, at least. My interest in you is neither amusement nor naivety. But she may not be wrong about society, Winifred pointed out gently. Your position, your family's history. I don't give a damn about my family's history, he interrupted with sudden vehemence. I've spent years watching people bow and scrape to a title while caring nothing for the person who holds it. I want a life with someone who values me for myself, not for the accident of my birth. The passion in his voice made her breath catch. James, what exactly are you saying? He crossed the room in 3 quick strides and took her hands in his. I'm saying that I love you, Winifred Whitmore. That despite the brevity of our acquaintance, I know with absolute certainty that you are the woman I want to spend my life with. You can't possibly know that, she whispered, though her heart soared at his words. Can't I? His smile was tender. I've traveled the world seeking meaning, purpose, connection. I've stood atop mountains in Tibet and sailed uncharted waters off the coast of Africa. But it wasn't until I danced with you in Huntington's garden that I felt truly seen for who I am. James, let me finish, please. He tightened his hold on her hands. I know what society will say. I know the challenges we would face. But I also know that you are worth any amount of societal disapproval. That a life with you, filled with genuine understanding and shared passion, would be infinitely more valuable than one spent meeting the expectations of people I neither respect nor care for. Tears pricked at Winifred's eyes. You make it sound so simple. Not simple, he corrected. Worth fighting for. He released one of her hands to reach into his coat pocket, withdrawing a small velvet box that made her heart stop. I had planned to do this more formally, perhaps in the garden where we first met, he said with a rueful smile. But Lady Peverley's intervention has forced my hand. He opened the box to reveal a ring unlike any Winifred had ever seen, a deep blue sapphire surrounded by smaller diamonds, set in intricate gold filigree. "This was my grandmother's," he explained. "She was considered somewhat eccentric in her day, too. I think she would have approved of you." "James, are you certain?" Winifred asked, scarcely able to believe what was happening. "Lady Peverley is motivated by her own ambitions for her son," he finished firmly. "As are half the matrons in London who have eligible daughters. Their disapproval is a small price to pay for happiness." He sank to one knee before her, still holding her hand. "Winifred Whitmore, will you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" For a moment, all the practical concerns that had dominated her life for years rose up, the potential for scandal, the certain disapproval of society, the enormous gulf between their stations. But as she looked into James's eyes, seeing nothing but sincerity and love reflected there, those concerns seemed suddenly insignificant against the prospect of a life with this remarkable man. "Yes," she said, her voice growing stronger with certainty. "Yes, I will marry you." His smile was radiant as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to pull her gently into his arms. "You've made me the happiest of men," he murmured, before bending to capture her lips in a kiss that promised a lifetime of shared joy and adventure. Their engagement announcement in the Gazette the following week caused precisely the stir that Lady Peverley had predicted. Society matrons whispered behind their fans, gentlemen raised eyebrows in their clubs, and more than one young lady wept bitter tears of disappointment. But as the weeks passed and the Duke of Harrington made it abundantly clear that his choice was made with full knowledge and without reservation, the initial scandal gradually gave way to reluctant acceptance. The wedding, held in the chapel at Harrington House that autumn, was attended by a curious mixture of London's highest society and a collection of unconventional friends James had made during his travels. Winifred, radiant in a gown of ivory silk with forget-me-nots woven into her hair, walked toward her future with her head held high, certain that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. And if, in years to come, London society occasionally raised eyebrows at the Duchess of Harrington's habit of working alongside the gardeners in her magnificent grounds, or at the Duke's preference for his wife's company over that of other gentlemen at his club, the couple themselves were too content in their shared life to notice, or care.